Welcome back to the deep dive. You've brought us a truly monumental stack of sources today, and it's all focused on a figure who often feels, I don't know, more like a legend than a real person. Alan Turing.
He really does.
We're not just talking about a mathematician here. We're talking about, really, the theoretical architect of the entire digital age.
Yeah, and it's almost impossible to overstate his importance. Turing was a polymath in, the truest sense of the word. A mathematician, logician, cryptanalyst, philosopher, and then later in life, a theoretical biologist.
Right.
But his most immediate impact, the thing we have to start with, was on the survival of the free world. I think the cognitive scientist Douglas Hofstadter framed it perfectly. He said, and I'm quoting here, "We owe much to Alan Turing for the fact that we are not under Nazi rule today."
Wow. Okay, that sets the bar incredibly high. So our mission today is to, I guess, synthesize the timeline of that genius. We need to trace this trajectory of his mind from creating these abstract theories in an ivory tower to his role saving millions of lives in World War II, and then finally to the tragic, just agonizing irony of how the country he saved later turned on him.
Exactly. And I think we can structure this deep dive around what you could call the three pillars of his genius. They really define his core identity.
Oh.
First, formalizing the concept of the algorithm with what we now call the universal Turing machine. Second, designing the mechanical and, crucially, the statistical methods that cracked the Enigma cipher, the ultra-intelligence.
Right.
And third, creating the foundational blueprint for the stored program computer, the automatic computing engine, or ACE. So let's journey back to his beginnings.
Let's do it. Turing was born in 1912 in Maida Vale, London, but under these kind of peculiar circumstances where his father, Julius, was serving in India with the civil service.
Right. And his parents were adamant. They strongly believed their children had to be raised and educated in Britain, which, set him up for a very traditional, if often conflicting, English education.
And the signs that he was different, that he was exceptional, they were there almost immediately.
Oh, right away. His headmistress at St. Michael's Preparatory School saw this unique mind and explicitly called him a genius. But then, as soon as he enters the formal system at Sherborne School, at age 13, that genius immediately starts to clash with tradition.
Sherborne at the time was, deeply invested in the classics. Latin, Greek.
All of it. Latin, Greek, history. The whole focus was on rhetoric and the traditional humanities, not the hard sciences that just fascinated Turing.
So his interests were seen as a problem.
Precisely. His dedication to, these unauthorized self-directed science experiments and deep mathematical puzzles, it put him constantly at odds with the schoolmasters. His brilliance was seen more as a distraction than a virtue. Wow. It got so bad that the headmaster actually expressed this genuine worry, fearing that Turing might fall between two stools.
Meaning what, exactly?
Yeah. Meaning he'd fail to become a proper classical scholar, but also fail to succeed academically because he just wouldn't conform. It's an incredible thing to say about a genius.
It speaks volumes that even with that deliberate discouragement, his aptitude just broke through anyway. We read that by 1927, he was already tackling advanced mathematical problems on his own.
On his own, without the benefit of formal instruction, he was even solving problems that needed a grasp of elementary calculus, which he hadn't been taught.
And that's just the beginning. At age 16, he encounters Albert Einstein's work.
Yeah, and the sources highlight this really astonishing example of his intuitive leap. Just from reading the text, he was able to deduce the fundamental questions Einstein was posing about the limits of Newton's laws of motion.
Questions the textbook didn't even state.
Exactly. He wasn't just processing information. He was seeing the next step, the deeper problem underneath.
But before that intellectual journey could really mature, his life was just completely upended by a deeply personal tragedy. We have to talk about his relationship with Christopher Morcom at Sherborne.
We do. It was, by all accounts, an all-consuming relationship for him. Biographers often describe it as his first love. They were intellectual kindred spirits.
They shared a passion for science, math.
Science, mathematics, astronomy. Morcom was probably the only person at Sherborne who truly understood and appreciated Turing's mind on its own terms.
So the loss then, when Morcom died so suddenly in February 1930, Must have been just devastating.
It was shattering. Morecambe died from complications of bovine tuberculosis, which he probably contracted years earlier from infected milk. And Turing, reeling, he tried to cope by intellectualizing the loss, just pouring himself entirely into their shared scientific interests.
There's that poignant letter he wrote to Morecambe's mother, Frances.
It's heartbreaking. He vows to put as much energy, if not as much interest, into their shared work as if Christopher were still there. He believed that was the tribute Morecambe would have wanted.
And what's fascinating is how that grief seems to have, I don't know, redirected his whole philosophical compass, especially on the concept of mind and matter.
Yeah, that loss was a major catalyst. It pushed him toward atheism and materialism. He had previously held this belief, you see it in his letters, in the idea of a spirit surviving the body and finding a new body sooner or later.
But the reality of Morecambe's death changed that.
The sudden, brutal reality of it seems to have focused his mind away from metaphysics and toward the purely scientific seeking explanations in the mechanics of the material world. It demanded a scientific framework for how ideas could persist, which led him, really, directly toward the idea of computation.
And that framework arrives in his 1936 paper on computable numbers. This is the paper with the foundation of the Turing machine. He wrote it right after getting a fellowship at King's College, Cambridge.
He did. And it's a slightly amusing historical footnote that his dissertation, which proved a version of the central limit theorem, was later found to have already been proven by someone else years earlier.
Oh, so he wasn't the first.
Not on that specific theorem, no. But his fellowship was secured based on the sheer originality of his methodology. The real breakthrough, though, came in that 1936 paper.
It was published right after Alonzo Church's work on the same problem.
Right, on the question of decidability in mathematics. But where Church used the really abstract language of lambda calculus, Turing introduced this concrete, formal, hypothetical device.
Okay, let's pause there because the difference between those two approaches is so critical. What made the Turing machine, and not Church's lambda calculus, the intuitive jump-off point for modern computers?
That's a great question because mathematically they both define the same class of computable functions. That's the Church-Turing thesis. But Church's lambda calculus, it approaches computability through formal logic, manipulating functions. It's purely abstract.
And Turing's was mechanical.
He provided a mechanical, almost physical analogy. He imagined a machine that followed simple, finite rules, reading and writing symbols on an infinitely long strip of tape.
So the genius wasn't just the logic, it was the embodiment of the logic in a machine you could actually picture.
Exactly. The Turing machine immediately gave people the conceptual blueprint for a physical device that could perform any calculation. And within that, he proposed the single most important concept of all, the universal Turing machine.
The universal machine.
Yeah.
What's the fundamental idea there that makes it more than just a fancy calculator?
Well, a standard machine is designed to do one specific thing, say, multiply two numbers. The universal machine is a machine that could perform the task of any other Turing machine.
How?
Simply by reading the other machine's program description from its tape. So instead of needing 1,000 different specialized machines, you only need one machine, which can be reprogrammed over and over again.
That is the conceptual foundation of the modern stored program computer. The software is separate from the hardware.
Absolutely. The universal Turing machine provided that conceptual link between abstract math and physical reality. It basically solved the philosophical problem of what computation actually is.
And the paper did something else, something equally profound.
It did. It established the limits of computation by tackling Hilbert's and Scheiding's problem, or the decision problem.
And this is where we get the famous halting problem.
Right. Turing proved that there are fundamental mathematical questions that an algorithm simply cannot decide. Specifically, the halting problem. There is no universal algorithm that can look at any given computer program and determine in a finite amount of time whether that program will eventually finish or just run forever in an infinite loop.
So in one paper, he defines the entire potential of computation, everything that can be calculated. And at the same time, he defines the fundamental, unshakable boundary of what cannot.
That is the ultimate so what of this single paper. John von Neumann, when he was designing America's first computers after the war, he acknowledged that the entire conceptual framework of the modern computer was owed directly to Turing's 1936 paper. It stands as, arguably the most influential single mathematical paper of the 20th century.
And we transition now from those abstract limits of calculation to the massive real-world computation needed to crack the German war machine. Turing's theoretical knowledge immediately becomes the world's most critical military asset.
Right. He starts working for the Government Common Cipher School, GCNCS, part-time in 1938, and reports full-time on September 4th, 1939, the day after Britain declares war.
The transition from King's College Fellow to wartime cryptanalyst was immediate.
Immediate and incredibly demanding, and critically, his work was cloaked in absolute secrecy. Like everyone at Bletchley Park, he signed the Official Secrets Act with the condition that his silence had to continue indefinitely after the war ended.
Which explains the decades of historical anonymity and contributes to the ultimate tragedy we'll get to later. But his first task was the Enigma machine. What made that thing so fiendishly difficult to crack?
Well, the German Enigma used this complex system of rotors and a plug board. The number of possible settings, the combination of rotor order, ring settings, plug board connections, it was just astronomical.
We're talking numbers that are hard to even imagine.
I mean, the basic three-rotor Enigma had something on the order of 10 to the 19 possible states. Checking every possibility manually was just utterly impossible. And the four-rotor naval version was even worse, reaching 10 to the 22.
That's more than grains of sand on many beaches. So how did Turing even start to approach bringing those numbers down to a manageable size?
His solution, the bombe, was an electromechanical machine, a huge improvement on a pre-war Polish design. And its genius, which he specified within weeks of arriving, was based on exploiting a fundamental weakness of the Enigma machine.
Which was?
An encoded letter could never be the same as the original letter. An A could never be enciphered as an A.
Ah, okay. So the bombe didn't try to find the solution. It tried to find the settings that could possibly be the solution.
Exactly. The core of the bombe's function was the logical principle of contradiction. Cryptanalysts would first get a crib, a fragment of probable plaintext they suspected might be in the message.
Like a weather report or Hail Hitler or something?
A predictable phrase, exactly. The bombe would then run through potential Enigma settings, and if a setting caused a contradiction, like that A turning into an A, that setting was instantly ruled out. It performed thousands of these logical deductions per second, just dramatically reducing the number of possibilities.
But even with this groundbreaking machine, we get to a point in 1941 where progress is being stifled not by complexity, but by, well, bureaucracy.
Yes, and this is a critical moment. By late 1941, the German military is increasing message traffic, they're adding new procedures, and Bletchley needs to move faster. Turing and his colleagues, Gordon Welchman, Hugh Alexander, Stuart Milner-Berry, they felt they had the scientific answer, but they were just critically short of resources.
Not enough staff, not enough new bombs being built.
And their internal appeals were just going nowhere.
So they decided to go around the chain of command.
They bypassed the entire command chain. They wrote a letter directly to Prime Minister Winston Churchill. They argued that while their requirements in money and staff were tiny compared to the overall military budget, the assistance they could offer could potentially save the entire war effort.
And Churchill's response?
Legendary. And absolutely immediate. Churchill wrote the now famous memo, "Action this day," and then he continued. "Make sure they have all they want on extreme priority and report to me that this has been done."
Wow. That must have cut through years of potential bureaucratic delay in a single day.
Milner-Berry later said that almost from that day, the rough ways began miraculously to be made smooth. Production scaled up rapidly. They had over 200 bombs running by the end of the war, providing that constant intelligence flow.
And Turing himself took on one of the toughest challenges at Bletchley, working in Hut 8 on the German naval Enigma. Why was the naval code so much harder?
The naval Enigma used stricter security procedures and a much more complex indicator system for transmitting the message key. The traffic was often sparse, and the consequences of failure U-boat attacks in the Atlantic were catastrophic.
And he tackled this particularly difficult problem largely by himself.
He did. He cracked the essential part of the naval indicator system in December 1939. And this led to one of his most critical statistical innovations, a technique with a very unusual name, bomberismus.
Bomberismus. It sounds strange.
It's one of his most underrated contributions because it stayed secret for so long. It was a sequential statistical technique. To put it simply, it wasn't just brute force trial and error. It was a way of managing probability based on overlapping letters in pairs of messages.
So he was quantifying uncertainty.
Yes, he was assigning numerical weights of evidence to potential settings. He called the unit of this evidence the ban, which is basically a logarithmic measure of probability. what we might now call a decibin in information theory.
So it made the bombs more efficient.
Drastically. It accelerated the process, made the search for the cribs more efficient, and cut down the required machine time. The fact that his papers on this weren't declassified by GCHQ until 2012 tells you just how foundational this concept was.
In this high-stakes, hyper-secret, just mentally exhausting environment, Turing developed some legendary quirks, the nickname Prof.
Oh, he was deeply eccentric. There's the famous image of him cycling around Bletchley wearing a gas mask.
Not because of gas attacks, but...
To ward off hay fever pollen.
Yeah.
And then there was his bicycle. The chain would fall off at mathematically predictable intervals. So rather than fix it, he calculated precisely how many pedal rotations he could get before the break, and he would just stop, hop off, manually adjust the chain, and continue on his way.
That is the ultimate example of a genius applying a rigorous mathematical solution to a simple mechanical problem.
Exactly. And of course, there's the story of the mug chained to the radiator. He just decided the only logical solution to a disappearing mug was to secure it with a padlock.
But beyond the quirks, he maintained this incredible physical regimen. He was a serious, almost world-class athlete.
A phenomenally gifted long-distance runner. He often ran the 40 miles from Bletchley to London for meetings. His marathon time was competitive on a global level. He was only 11 minutes slower than the 1948 British Olympic silver medalist.
And his reason for training with that level of intensity was so telling.
It really was. He said, "I have such a stressful job that the only way I can get it out of my mind is by running hard. It's the only way I can get some release." Running wasn't just a hobby for him. It was a critical psychological coping mechanism.
And his work went beyond just Enigma. He also made critical contributions to tackling the superior Lorenz cipher, codenamed Tunny.
Right, the Lorenz cipher was even more complex, used for high-level communications. In 1942, Turing devised Turingery, which was another statistical technique designed to crack the underlying wheel patterns of the Lorenz machine. And while others went on to use that foundation to build Colossus.
The world's first programmable digital electronic computer.
Turingery provided that essential conceptual framework for finding the patterns in the first place.
And then there was Delilah, his attempt at secure voice communications.
Yes, late in the war. A portable, secure voice scrambler. He managed a successful demonstration, famously encrypting and decrypting a recording of a Winston Churchill speech. But it was just completed too late, and its distance limitations made it impractical, so it was never adopted.
So when we look at the totality of his wartime achievements, what is the ultimate verdict from the official historians?
The official war historian, Harry Hinsley, gave the definitive estimate. The ultra-intelligence, which was driven by Turing's core advances, shortened the war in Europe by more than 2 years.
More than 2 years.
It's a staggering metric that confirms he wasn't just a contributor, he was a central pillar of the Allied victory.
It's astounding that immediately after winning the war, Turing just pivots right back to the theory he loved, applying his insights to design the future. His first post-war project was the blueprint for the first stored program computer.
From 45 to 47, he was at the National Physical Laboratory, the NPL, and there he delivered the first really comprehensive, detailed design for a stored program computer, the Automatic Computing Engine, or ACE.
This was happening around the same time as John von Neumann's work in the U.S.
It was, but the ACE design was generally considered to be far more specific and technically detailed. But it got delayed, and here we find this tragic irony that ties right back to the secrecy of Bletchley Park.
The Official Secrets Act.
The irony is just profound. The act that demanded his silence about code breaking now actively crippled his peacetime work. When Turing tried to explain the rationale for certain design choices, why the machine needed a certain speed, or how it should interact with operators, that knowledge came directly from his wartime experience.
And he couldn't explain the why.
He couldn't explain why he knew these things. So the NPL administration was slow to grasp the novelty and the necessity of his design. The delays were just maddening for him.
So he's designing the future based on lessons he's legally forbidden from sharing.
Exactly. The delays were maddening, and he got disillusioned. By the time he left NPL for good, they'd only managed to build a scaled-down version, the Pilot ACE.
Which still proved the concept.
Oh, absolutely. The Pilot ACE executed its first program in May 1950. Even as a smaller version, its principles were hugely influential.
So in 1948, Turing joins the University of Manchester. He becomes deputy director of the Computing Machine Laboratory, working on software for the Manchester Mark I.
Right, so the focus shifts from pure hardware design to the practical challenges of programming. He wrote the first programmer's manual for the Mark I. He was essentially translating the theoretical machine into physical code.
And while he's in Manchester, we find this wonderful anecdote that ties his wartime paranoia to a very personal failure of cryptanalysis. The buried silver story.
It's a classic. It reflects the lasting mental toll of the war. In the 40s, he got consumed by this fear that Germany might invade, the banks would collapse, so he bought two massive silver bars.
A small fortune.
About 48,000 pounds in today's money. He wrapped them up and buried them in a wood near Bletchley Park.
And he didn't just mark the location, he coded it.
He used cryptography to code the location, and later, when he tried to retrieve them, he discovered that either the landscape had changed or, in a perfect piece of irony, he couldn't break his own complex location cipher.
He lost them forever.
Lost them forever, a testament to the secrets he was forced to keep.
Okay, let's jump to the concept that made him famous outside of military history. The Turing test and the foundation of artificial intelligence. This was his landmark 1950 paper, Computing Machinery and Intelligence.
This paper just changed the whole conversation. Instead of asking the loaded question, can machines think, which he just dismissed as being too vague, he proposed an operational substitute, the imitation game.
What we now call the Turing test. Can you walk us through it?
Sure. The test involves three participants, a human interrogator, another human, and a machine. The interrogator communicates with the other two only through text, like a chat. If the interrogator can't reliably tell the machine apart from the human,
Then the machine passes.
it passes. And Turing suggested we should then be willing to call that machine intelligent.
But what's so insightful is the development strategy he proposed. He didn't suggest programming an adult genius.
That's the brilliant part that's often overlooked. He argued that trying to simulate a fully formed adult mind was too difficult. Instead, he proposed that developers should create a relatively simple program that simulates a child's mind, a machine child, and then subject that program to a rigorous course of education. The learning process, he believed, was the key.
It's astonishing that this is still central to AI discussions today. And we see a reverse application of his test every single time we log in online.
We do. The TCHS, completely automated public Turing test to tell computers and humans apart, is a direct inverse application. Its sole purpose is to prove that you are the human and not the sophisticated computer.
We can't leave this section without talking about Turing, his chess program. It gives us one of the most endearing images of early computing struggles.
Turing was developed by Turing and his colleague D.G. Champernoun in 1948. It was a theoretical program, an algorithm written down with rules for piece values, board evaluation, and so on. But they had no physical machine that could actually run it.
And when they finally tried to run it on the Ferranti Mark I in 1952, it was still too primitive.
So Turing did the only logical thing. He became the processor. He ran the Turing program manually. He would flip through the pages of the algorithm, calculate the outcomes of potential moves according to the program's rules, and carry out the instructions on a chessboard.
How long did that take per move?
About half an hour for every single move.
A monumental commitment to proving a concept.
He eventually lost the game to a colleague, but the point was made. Garry Kasparov later reviewed the game and confirmed the algorithm played a recognizable game of chess, proving that a rule-based system could indeed approach complex human tasks.
Just when we think we have the measure of him, Turing makes this dramatic late career pivot. In 1951, he shifts his focus from computing to the mechanics of life itself. His final major paper, The Chemical Basis of Morphogenesis.
It's fascinating. He was applying his understanding of complex self-organizing systems knowledge from designing computers to solve a fundamental biological problem. Morphogenesis is the process of how patterns and shapes develop. Essentially, why do zebras have stripes and leopards have spots?
And he proposed a completely counterintuitive explanation based on chemistry.
He proposed the reaction diffusion system. This mathematical model suggests that patterns can spontaneously emerge in a completely uniform homogeneous system if you have two chemicals, an activator and an inhibitor, and they diffuse across space at different rates.
Okay, break that down for us. The activator and the inhibitor.
Right. Chemical A is the activator. It's an autocatalyst, meaning when it reacts, it produces more of itself. A positive feedback loop. Chemical B is the inhibitor, which slows down the production of A, but the crucial part is the diffusion rate.
They have to be different. Why?
If they diffused at the same rate, the system would just stay uniform. But if the activator A is short range, it diffuses slowly, and the inhibitor B is long range, it diffuses much faster, then a pattern emerges. The activator creates a spot, but the faster-moving inhibitor moves out and suppresses other spots from forming nearby.
Which creates a regular, predictable spacing.
A regular, predictable spacing. It was revolutionary, especially since it was published before the structure of DNA was even fully understood. His model even predicted phenomena that hadn't been observed yet, like oscillating chemical reactions.
And how seminal is this work in modern biology?
It's extremely seminal. It showed that self-organization could be explained by local chemical interactions creating a global structure. Today, it's used across biology. Professor James Murray used Turing principles to model the specific spacing of spots on cat fur. It's linked to everything from the growth of feathers to the branching in our lungs.
So has this theory been proven in a real living context?
That's the most exciting recent development. In 2023, researchers published a detailed verification. They conducted an experiment using growing chia seeds in a uniform layer. By manipulating moisture levels, which acted as the diffusion factors, they were able to reliably reproduce Turing-type patterns using living vegetation.
Wow. A real-world confirmation 70 years later.
A definitive one.
It's a difficult and essential transition to move from the sheer intellectual triumph of that last paper to the stark reality of the national tragedy that followed. We have to address his conviction for gross indecency.
The legal background is just crucial to understanding the cruelty of the time. In the UK, homosexual acts were serious criminal offenses under an 1885 law. This was the discriminatory framework that ultimately shattered Turing's life.
And the actual events that led to his prosecution didn't even start with a morality sting. It started with a simple crime.
That's right. In late 1951, Turing, who was 39, began an intimate relationship with a 19-year-old man, Arnold Murray. The catastrophe began in January 1952 when Turing's home was burgled. When he reported it, Murray was implicated. And during the police investigation, Turing, who was always brutally honest,
He just admitted it.
he felt compelled to admit that he had a sexual relationship with Murray.
And that admission led directly to charges against both of them for gross indecency.
Yes, he was facing a society that just didn't distinguish between a consensual private relationship and a criminal act. He was advised to plead guilty, which he did in March 1952, and he was given this terrible choice by the judge: 2 years in prison or 1 year of probation if he underwent hormonal treatment.
What we now call chemical castration.
Correct. Turing, terrified of what prison time would do to his mind, chose the probation. For a year, he received regular injections of stilbestrol, a synthetic estrogen. The treatment had devastating physical consequences, impotence, the growth of breast tissue. It was a state-mandated violation of his body.
There's that heartbreaking quote from a letter he wrote during this time.
Yeah, he tried to maintain a clinical distance, writing, "No doubt I shall emerge from it all a different man, but quite who I've not found out." It's just a chilling statement of profound forced change.
And the professional damage was immediate, especially considering the timing.
This was the height of the Cold War. The Cambridge 5 spy defections had caused massive paranoia. Anyone identified as homosexual was flagged as a potential security risk on the assumption they could be blackmailed.
So Turing, the man who provided the most critical intelligence of the war, suddenly loses his security clearance.
Instantly. He's barred from any consultancy work for GCHQ. He was suddenly viewed not as a genius, but as a security threat to the very nation he had saved.
An unbelievable betrayal.
It was. He was marginalized, monitored, and cut off from the work that was his passion.
And this period of immense humiliation and trauma brings us to his controversial death in 1954.
He died on June 7, 1954, at his home, aged 41. The cause was cyanide poisoning. The inquest ruled it a suicide. And the enduring image is that of the half-eaten apple found beside his bed, which was speculated to have been dipped in cyanide.
But the suicide verdict is heavily disputed.
There are significant arguments against it. The philosopher Jack Copeland noted the autopsy findings were more consistent with cyanide inhalation rather than ingestion. Turing had a gold electroplating apparatus in his spare room, which used potassium cyanide, and he was often careless with it.
And his demeanor just before his death didn't really align with someone planning to end his life.
Not at all. His nephew, Dermot Turing, and others said he'd endured the treatment with good humor. He was making cheerful plans. Crucially, he had left a list of tasks he intended to complete when he returned to his office after the holiday. That kind of planning is highly inconsistent with suicide.
So some biographers even suggest he might have staged it.
That's the theory from his biographer, Andrew Hodges. He theorized Turing might have deliberately staged the scene, the famous apple, to look like a science accident, a casual mistake, specifically to protect his mother, who was deeply religious and never accepted the suicide verdict.
The shadow of this injustice hung over his legacy for decades, until the 21st century brought this campaign for redemption.
It began in earnest with a public petition in 2009. Prime Minister Gordon Brown responded, releasing an official public apology on behalf of the government for the appalling way he was treated. He called it utterly unfair.
But an apology isn't legal absolution. That required years of further campaigning.
Right. Led by figures like MP John Leach, supported by Stephen Hawking, the campaign sought a royal pardon. It was granted by Queen Elizabeth II in December 2013.
Which is exceptionally rare.
Only the fourth such pardon granted since World War II. It was a rare use of royal prerogative to correct a moral historical wrong.
And the final act of societal redress was the Alan Turing Law in 2017.
Yes. The law, informally named in his honor, went far beyond just Turing. It retroactively pardoned or exonerated thousands of other men and women who had been convicted under those same historical laws. It was a monumental acknowledgement that the state's failure was systemic.
When we synthesize Turing's extraordinary, painful life, from the abstract power of the universal machine, through his role shortening World War II by 2 years, to his late-life pioneering work, we are looking at a singular intellectual force.
His contribution spans every major field of 20th century science. He left a seminal, foundational paper in every field he touched. The recognition is finally visible. His portrait is on the 50-pound note, released on his birthday in 2021. He was the essential architect of the digital world we all now inhabit.
And yet, that triumph is forever intertwined with the tragic fact that the very nation he protected subjected him to a state-mandated persecution that contributed directly to his early death.
That tension persists. Just last year, Defense Secretary Ben Wallace suggested Turing should get a permanent statue on the fourth plinth of Trafalgar Square, calling him probably the greatest war hero. He's being championed as a national hero and a national martyr at the same time.
So given the scale of his achievements and the scale of the injustice, this deep dive really leaves you with this question. When you look back at his life, where do you draw the line between the genius who helped us win the war and the individual that nation failed in peacetime? What part of his extraordinary, tragic story should history remember most clearly?
And maybe, what would the landscape of science, computing, and even biology look like today if that genius had been permitted to live out his full potential without prejudice?
We'll leave you to ponder those profound questions. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.